This is Mayor Dennis Donohue, and I'm joined by a good friend, the CEO of Chispa, Jeff Morgan. Jeff,
Hello,
welcome.
Mayor. Thank you so much. It's nice to be here. I'm Jeff Morgan. I'm the president and CEO of Chispa. So we've been serving Salinas for over 46 years. Not me personally here, but
Right.
we have a lot of different housing that we've been building. Most of it here in the city of Salinas.
Well, in many respects, you're the man of the hour because, as we're going to discuss, housing really is top of mind for virtually everyone I come in contact with
Definitely.
these days. And then the other thing is this is Fair Housing Month, so and one of the components of that is equal access to housing. Besides any discrimination and that sort of thing, but certainly access is something we talk a lot about in Salinas. So.
Definitely.
You're front and center these days.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's important. And, fair housing, it just sounds like a big legislative thing. Well, I have fair housing laws. And obviously, that came about all the way back in the 60s. And you think about people that were discriminated against, racial discrimination. And obviously, those rules have gone away. The way I really see it is fair access to folks that have historically been marginalized. And we have a divided society where it's getting harder and harder because we just simply haven't built enough housing since 1989. So giving setting aside funds for the folks that we serve, the lower income, who otherwise wouldn't be housed properly, to me, that's one of the best things you can do to perpetuate real fair housing and
Well,
real choice.
let's talk a little bit about that because I know that's at the heart of Chispa's work. But
Right.
before we jump into that, as you mentioned, you haven't been here
No.
all 46 years. So who's Jeff Morgan? Your background? Where'd you come from? And
Thank you.
we're
Thank you.
certainly glad you're here. And then we'll talk about the work of Chispa.
Well, I started out in this work about 25 years ago. It's hard to believe now, but I was originally in San Jose, and I actually came to visit back in the first time I came to Salinas was back around 2007. And actually, you were mayor when I arrived, and we worked on Salinas Gateway Apartments. We built a very environmentally sustainable, affordable housing community near the train station
Right.
for 75 senior households,
Right.
which is still there today. So I'm very proud of that. But I've been doing this for quite a few years. I've been at Chispa now for 3.5, and I'm carrying on the legacy of Alfred Diaz
Right.
Infante, who I deeply admire, and super proud to carry on with this legacy where I've inherited an organization that serves 5,000 residents in the Central Valley
Well, it's certainly a
and the Central
testimony to
Coast.
Alfred that, uh, as regrettable as the situation was, I mean, you took out something that really was a well-oiled machine, thanks so much to the groundwork
Yes,
and the foundation that he laid. And and it's interesting you mentioned the gateway housing in 2007 because one of the things that I think is important, and it's one of the things we tried to do with the housing summit that we held recently is what's the big picture on housing in the country and in California and even in Salinas because from a practical standpoint the reality is we haven't built any we've built significant projects which I want to talk a little bit about in terms of what Chiefs has
sure.
done, but from a volume standpoint we haven't built any significant housing really since before the turn of the century.
Hmm.
And so a lot of folks kind of wonder, how did we get into this situation? What set up this really this housing crisis, shortage, high costs that we're living with today?
It's interesting, and their opinions vary on all of these topics. To me, there was a point where it was around just after 1989, it became very noticeable. So we got a lot of rules came into effect and around environmental justice, and those are important rules. But sometimes the California Environmental Quality Act was actually used as a weapon to stop some subdivisions and affordable housing. So around 1989, we stopped building enough housing. So from that point forward in the state, uh, prices continued to grow. There became less and less affordability, and it was difficult to see. At this point, we have a deficit of over 1 million units of housing in California
In
that we need to
California.
build.
Well, and that's an important comment because as we and we're waiting for the future growth area to come online, but
Hmm.
a lot of housing, Creek Bridge, et cetera, had been built, and you mentioned the
Hmm.
late '80s, but really, in order for um, those housing units to have been built, they needed to be in the pipeline for a significant period of time.
That's
So,
right.
so talk a little bit about the kind of the pipeline effect, for bigger subdivisions, and how long you kind of have to be in to be in the queue, because obviously then, so that housing got built. We annexed the future growth area,
Hmm.
2010, all ready to go, and then the recession,
Right.
and then then the rest of that decade, difficult economic times. You're getting ready to reload, then COVID. So this issue of the pipeline, it's a big deal, isn't it?
It is. It is. For us at Chispa, we try to stay. We want to stay on mission. We know our bounds in terms of financial capacity. One of the big difficulties today is the uncertainty. So at the federal and state level, we have the kind of housing that you need funding because we mostly produce rental housing, and it's rental housing for people that are below their low income. So that means
Right.
they're 80% and usually 60% or less of area median income. So picture two families that are earning somewhere around minimum wage. They're in a household with four people. Maybe they're making 60,000 a year. There's nowhere for them to live. A lot of the folks that we're housing are doubled up. Were originally either doubled up or tripled up or quadrupled up in the same housing conditions because it was just the supply. It was an issue of supply. So by way of pipeline, what you're describing is this sort of extended time period where we've had various kinds of reviews, environmental reviews, but there's been a lot of empowerment where local communities obviously had a right to state opinions, understand traffic impacts, but what we've seen is, when I started 20 years ago, you could build out an affordable housing community within 4 years, and that's including the time it took to get the land use approvals and the financing, and then maybe a couple of years to build it out. But that was 20 years ago. Today, gosh, there were so many hurdles brought up that you could double the amount of time. As that was going on, we also saw big inflation. So I've experienced times when we've had 5-10% construction cost increases. So compound that on with COVID or with the Great Recession when we started having in 2009, there were issues around underwriting for housing was done in such a way where there was all this money chasing after projects, and people were doing these, they were teaser rate loans that were doomed. And so there was a moment where a whole generation of Americans experienced folks that were being foreclosed on.
Well, and so the larger projects obviously include an inclusionary component. So,
Yes,
the idea is you have to build 10,000 to get 2,000,
right, right,
more affordable units. So when that comes to a standstill,
right.
a larger percentage of affordable doesn't get built. But in Chispa's world, projects are still
Hmm.
possible. So to the degree there has been housing in the area, it's been driven more by projects, the type that build. So
Hmm.
you've been able to stay on mission somewhat, though I presume we
Yes,
need to pick up on the comment you said, affordable housing. It has gotten less affordable to build affordable
right,
housing, which is
right.
kind of your catch 22.
That's a fact. And so, it's one of these ideas around sort of turning housing into sort of the everything bagel of policy. So when I throw, okay, well, we need to have certain requirements around the design, certain requirements around who lives in the units, and then there's a special architectural features that might get added. The trouble isn't any one thing. It's as these requirements get layered, or we have funding sources that don't work in the same cycle, then you basically imagine when I get a certain amount of money and my project was $10, but I have to wait a year to get the other part of my money to build it. But meanwhile, prices went up 10%. Now I need extra money. And that's one way that a lot of these projects get delayed on the affordable housing side.
Well, and it's interesting, and there's a lot of dialogue, and why doesn't the city build more housing? And we always
Yeah.
have to explain we actually don't build housing. We work with organizations like
That
yours
do.
to help with
Right.
get grants, and then we need to make darn sure that we're not an obstacle as it relates to permitting and
Hmm.
process and that sort of thing. But uh, you know, you talk about staying on mission, and from my standpoint, s- you know, people might appreciate knowing what the problem is, but then of course is the
Hmm.
next question, which really kind of brings us to where are we as a community and what are some of the things you're seeing? Okay, that's great. You told me the problem. What are you going to do about it? And who's supposed
Right.
to do something about it? And I certainly think there's a role, obviously, for the city and the council and the mayor's office. How can we be supportive and promote? But um, so having said all that, what are your thoughts on because we're still expected to take the hill.
That's right.
So how do we do that?
Okay, so I think the way we do that is, first of all, let's get agnostic about whether it's affordable, market rate, whatever it
Right.
is. We need housing across the board. We just need all kinds of housing. When I work doing inclusionary housing, that 20% or whatever the number is of units that I can put in a market rate community otherwise would not have been available to me. So the subdivision home builders create their area, then they slice out a parcel, but we get the utilities, we get the roads that
Right.
lead us there. It
Right.
makes it a lot easier to build.
Okay.
So
Well,
that's
that's
a big
important.
option.
Yeah, that's a
And
big deal then.
the other thing is that we're seeing a raft of legislation. There must have been over 100 bills that have been put in place since Governor Brown first brought about 70 pro housing bills. And they're really reminding everybody in local jurisdictions as well. Frankly, it's empowering people to say, you know what, if you're 100% affordable, we're going to look at the Environmental Quality Act a little differently. You're going to have expedited processes. We're not going to require as much parking. All kinds of things that just make projects easier to build. I think some of the things that encourage me is the political momentum. Everybody understands now the magnitude of the problem. And it isn't that any one organization like CHISPA will solve it, but I'll tell you, Dennis, it's awfully satisfying to hand out those keys to the residents we do build for. So we're in the midst of building 40 units right now in King City of multifamily housing. Thanks to your leadership and the city councils, we got unanimous approval on 35 more units of senior housing that'll be in North Salinas. And frankly, we're looking to partner with a lot of the subdivisions that are building housing that'll be annexed into the city. So,
Well, one of the things I'm encouraged by, and kind of picking up on what you said, the momentum is shifting,
yes.
and one of the things I tell people, when difficult problems don't get solved over a long period of time, sometimes there are valid reasons for
Hmm.
that, and but the momentum is shifting, so that's a good thing. Um, but the other thing I'm observing, and feel like. With that momentum shift, you're now starting to see, uh, really a lot of innovation,
Hmm.
different types of housing and products, different approaches.
Yes.
Uh, so that marketplace, the entrepreneurial marketplace, is also beginning to move. At least that's certainly my sense. How do you?
Absolutely. So, there's been adaptations around things like modular housing.
Right.
There was one community I built, which was 135 units up in San Jose when I was working there. The modular units, basically, we went a lot of effort to put in the substructure parking garage, and then we created what they call a podium, which is where you have some retail or some community space on the first floor at ground level. And then it's like a podium, it's a table of concrete. Above it, we put in modular housing. So imagine Legos. You had boxes that were 30,000 pounds lifted by gigantic cranes that were shipped over from Idaho, wrapped in a waterproof barrier so that if it rained, they would be okay. And in a matter of 2 weeks, we had 128 modules that we put up. So our building went from 1 story to 5 stories in 2 weeks.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is impressive. But I was watching the news last night, and I was even seeing in Santa Cruz, Habitat for Humanity doing something.
Yes.
It was kind of a tiny homes project, but even doing something with hay going back to the 19th century or sod, the 19th century. But you're starting to see organizations like Revision West, Shibuya
Hmm.
Systems. That I mean, there really does seem to be. Uh, uh, an, again, for lack of a better phrase, the entrepreneurial spirit is
Hmm.
also at work besides what you do, and trying to get the future growth area online.
Absolutely. So I visited one house that was built as a demonstration, which was through Revision West and Shibusa Systems, which was modular. So essentially, they had panels, and they had high school kids that were actually from Rancho Cielo who came out and were able to pick up the panels and lock them into place and build a single family home. And that's a experimental, but they're imagine if you can have stuff that's built by the factory, ready to go, shipped in flat packs. One of the problems with modular is it's a factory, and if you don't keep the factory line rolling, you're still paying rent on the equipment and everything that's involved. So the idea there is, what's the next step? Well, if you go to places like Lockheed, where they've been building aircraft parts, or other people, they would actually bid for other factories to create parts, and they just knew what the spec was. And so we're seeing those kinds of different supply chains that are really changing the way we build. If you think about it, you don't build a car in your driveway, right? The car gets built in a factory and it comes out, and there are economies of scale. And so so there are different ways that people are trying to be innovative, and we're actually looking at building some transition age youth housing where we pick up modules, do the site work in advance. So essentially, we can just place the modules, attach the utilities, and house about 6 or 7 transition age youth families. A lot of some folks that are single moms and single parents. And speed is important. So the modular is good with speed. They're still working on the costs. That's still an issue. And site work, believe it or not, especially in a rural community, that's extremely important. Where you place your site, you don't want to run a mile of electrical or a mile of sewer, because that blows the economies out. So ultimately, if I can build urban and higher density, I love to do that, but it does cost more. So meanwhile, what do I do now? Because there are residents that need housing. We continue to have some of the lower density. There's still a demand for single family homes. There's still a demand for, say, 2 or 3 story stick frame apartments in some of the rural communities that are still efficient enough for us to build with some of the federal and state funding.
Well, your offices are right across the street, and from two projects. Having grown up in Salinas and remembering Old Town, now known Salinas City Center.
Yep.
The old Rabobank building,
Hmm.
SROs, and then you're across from 300 Main. And if you've paid attention closely over the years, some folks have lived on the upper floors of various retail
Definitely.
establishments, but that's kind of a newer phenomena for Salinas.
Right. And I think it's something we're going to keep tracking. There's a lot of economic opportunity, some areas of Salinas that you think about the areas around the airport. We think about economic development opportunities, but also, is there a way to build some higher density housing long term? As this funding becomes available and technologies improve, costs start to drop, we get more expedited in our processing. Maybe there's ways to take some of these lower slung retail and somehow combine those, or take, in New York, for example, they're using office space and redesigning them as residential because they don't have the same need for office that they used to have.
What I'd be curious what your opinion is. There's been a lot of conversation about ADUs, and I think folks that are interested in that. I mean, I think that's being explored, and that's almost that marketplace is going to take care of itself. The folks who
Hmm.
want to do that, and obviously going back to your first comment, we need housing of all kinds. So the future growth is trying to get moving, and hopefully we'll see the model homes ground broken sometime this fall. Talk a little bit about the type of projects you have in the queue,
Hmm.
and then you've just mentioned high rise, more density, and that Salinas has some pockets where we might explore that. I kind of feel like to the degree where we need to be maybe more proactive, particularly as we go through the general plan
Hmm.
process. This area of more strategic infill.
Hmm.
That seems to be the area where we might want to apply some elbow grease to, or is that base kind of covered? Can we do more there?
I think we can. One of the things that's been happening is, as folks are aging in place, I know that there are some older folks that if they have other housing options, they would move. But a lot of people are locked in because they have lower interest loans. They're still living in this housing. I think you're going to start to see more and more multi-generational lots. And so if I have a single family home, and let's say I'm raising my kids are raising a family, how likely is it that if we make it easy enough that the parents will maybe move into an accessory dwelling unit, they're near the kids, or you start to have three generations like we had years ago, or you start to make it easier to somehow expand some of the homes that we have in these single family communities. There's a lot of land there, and you know what they say, houses are like diamonds. Once you build them, they're there forever.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's hard to change that. But that's a really, if we make ADU construction easier, so there are organizations, for example, who will come in and say, hey, I'll build an ADU. Maybe they even collect a portion of the rent as a return on that investment, but they're able to pop something in. So if we have standardized plans, and especially plans where plan review isn't really, really expensive, you don't want to have an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard that the fees for reviewing cost as much as the ADU does, right?
yeah.
So as long as we can make that streamlined, I think that's a really good option. You think about Salinas and some of the subdivisions or where you have some vacant land, that's a very simple solution that keeps people housed in a more comfortable way.
Right,
And
right.
and I also think making it easier to do extensions or build, that's what people used to do anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you alluded to your comment about multi-generational.
Yeah.
What that kind of speaks to. One that's very very straightforward because I was immediately reminded of, you know, uh, the folks I worked with were from Italy, and
Yeah.
they, when I would go over there, to pay homage to the Radicchio gods, but the owner actually owned a four-story building,
Yeah.
and members of the family each occupied a floor.
Right.
So
Right.
the family's together. You it's multi-story, but you get privacy, but you're clearly together. That type of thing. And I bring that up because Salinas is really a place where family is important, and I frankly
Hmm.
think is going to get more and more important because I think one of the things that we all where I think there's a lot of agreement. This idea of we and you've had to put up with hearing me say this before. We export vegetables and far too many of our kids, and
Right.
and we'd like them to come home. And I think family is just really important in Salinas. So I think thinking a little differently about housing in the future is something that's got to be part of the mix. But I think it appeals to Salinas instincts.
Absolutely. Well, and I think about a lot of things. So you think about families that are here that are really living in overcrowded conditions, and how amazing it is when we're able to hand keys to residents. We handed last development I did. It had here. It was named after my predecessor, Alfred Diaz Infante Apartments. The first two residents that I moved in, the first families I moved in, one was moved out of a garage, and it was a family of 8, and another was a family of 7. Think about how much better their lives are. We have 500 hours of programming for kids, for birding, for all the things you can do around the Fort Ord National Refuge, the kids programs that we get involved with, things like Teen Leadership Council. So that's there's a lot of excitement when you can just create those more optimal circumstances. But and we talked about multi-generational housing. The other thing I would say is, let's talk about what do you do with that young family. So now they've raised their kids, they're in a better circumstance, but they go to college, they want to live here, but the average home price is pushing $1 million, right, for sale units, and some of the rentals are at 2,500. Studios are at a premium. What's to stop us from building a little bit smaller? We had if you go to New York City, they have the Tenement Museum, and this is how my family, when they came over from Europe, we had Russians that were, the Ashkenazi that came over, and they had, and there were overcrowded conditions, there were tenements, but they don't have to be that way. We could also have studios that are very efficient, that are a lower rent, but it's a decent, safe place to live for, say, a couple that's just starting out. And maybe they save their money. And we do see this. So we'll have folks living in affordable housing And because of the fact that they don't have to pay, they're paying 30%, less than 50% certainly of their income towards rent. They can save their money. And sometimes people can actually save enough with some down payment assistance as they get promoted and move up to go buy a
Right.
home.
Yeah. No, and I think getting people in their first home is,
Yeah.
got to be part of the objective. The other thing, and one of the reasons I think we want to push from an economic development stam standpoint,
Yeah.
in terms of creating more opportunities for young people to come back home. It does make it a little easier.
Hmm.
Those SROs, or however you design
Right.
housing. To begin that upward trajectory, because that's typically how it works. You start here, and then you might move once or twice again in your lifetime. But helping people get started and having that type of product seems to me to be really important. And you know, and the thing I wanted to mention, the other thing in terms of thinking differently, you can look at Spreckles. At the
Hmm.
end of the day, that was a company that provided housing for their employees. I know the school district stepped in, on Abbott Street, and there's conversations about, churches with more spacious parking lots
Yes.
eventually getting into
Yes.
housing. So people are also thinking about where and who in terms of who's involved on the development side.
Well, and we're also thinking about different levels. So, we've done housing for lower income. We've also built for sale housing that's for moderate income families. And we're looking at workforce. So, how do you get folks that are police?
Right,
How do you get folks that are teachers, healthcare
right,
professionals to get them into decent housing? And so, efficiencies where we're exploring things like modular housing, or we're exploring opportunities where we can partner with different agencies. And I know there have been some great partnerships, for example, where the school district here in Salinas recently bought a whole set of apartments for their teachers. So I think those kinds of creative mechanisms where you can use bond financing or school financing can help. But we're going to need to see that across all income levels.
Well, you mentioned, and we were chatting just before we came on air. There's a ballot initiative on the state that possibly
Hmm.
that's really important. Can you talk a little bit about that and its importance, and how that can pertain to Salinas?
Exactly. So there'll be an initiative that's we're looking at pushing forward as an organization for. Um, I'm also involved with the California Coalition for Rural Housing and with Housing California, which is a very large gathering of folks that really look at how do we support housing for the most vulnerable residents. Um, and it's a $10 billion bond measure that's being considered by the state to put before the voters. It's, I believe, going to be a lower threshold. It won't be at the 2/3. That's going to be extremely important. So what's happened so far is, such as it is, at the very least, there was money that was passed several years ago, Propositions 1 and 2, for $6 billion. All of that money has been spent pretty much. And we've built across the state thousands of units of housing. Right now, the state of California creates something in the range of 15 to 17,000 units of affordable housing a year. And we're looking at ways to accelerate it. So that $10 billion is basically money that gets set aside where instead of paying a bigger mortgage that lower income families can't afford, that's the little gap money that they say, okay, state, I'm giving you nonprofit or whoever this money so that you can lower the rents and create housing for people that need it the most. And that's going to be extremely important. The other thing that's happening is there's a measure where the secretary, right now housing is run by the Secretary of Business and Consumer Services and Housing, and they're talking about having a separate cabinet level position just for housing and homelessness and consolidating all of the agencies, because right now as an affordable housing provider, I have this whole alphabet soup of different funding sources that I need to apply for, but I have to do them at different periods of time. And if I get delayed, and let's say everyone in the state, okay, well, I apply for one source, but I got to wait 6 months, then I apply for another source. If I can do all that at once, I've got one stop shop. That's what the state is trying to do now. So if we're able to do that and accelerate the awarding of funds, now a nonprofit can say, here's what it costs right now. I'm going to get the funding now. I can get started now. I think if we could shave a year off the production of affordable housing, shave a year off the timeline to get it built, to get it funded, and let's say that we have costs that grow at 10% a year or 5% a year, what you could translate that to is if we have a fixed amount of funding, that basically means we can build 10% more housing because we don't have the delays that cause those costs.
Well, from your perspective, and in light of that, and we've kind of alluded to it throughout the conversation. I mean, my general take is
Yeah.
Salinas and all the players involved,
Yep.
stakeholders, pretty fully engaged on this issue.
Yes. Yes.
That's my take.
Right.
But the trick is on a go forward basis now, all the other players that impact Salinas's, on an aggregate basis, ability to move, uh, still some work to be done.
Yes.
And this bond will obviously help. Uh, where else do we need to apply pressure, for lack of a better phrase?
Monterey County, and Salinas is included, we tend not to get our fair share. A lot of the bigger cities will go provide their own measures to create revenues for affordable housing. If so, for example, when I was working in Santa Clara County, we passed Measure A, which was $1 billion bond measure, and we created over 5,000. The county created over 5,000 units of housing. A lot of it to address some of the issues around homelessness. That kind of leadership, if there's a way to build affordable housing with that local match money, here's what happens. When the state gives out this funding, we still get an opportunity because a lot of our areas are rural. There are special set-asides where I'm advocating to get more funding for rural housing, which will directly benefit our residents, some of the folks here in Salinas. But in addition to that, if we are able to come up with additional funds, if there's some other things, what that'll do is it'll grow. It'll mean we'll get our fair share. So these bigger cities, they get a big bond measure, they get their own local match. Now they're more competitive for the funding that the
Well,
state has.
it sounds like you're an outline of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and how hundreds of businesses and
Right.
entities came
Right.
together and said, "Hey,
Right.
listen, we got to control our own destiny." However, one thing with tech companies and the Silicon Valley is you do have the advantage of scale.
That's right.
So that's
That's right.
that's certainly one of our challenges. So, but it does, but it's helpful certainly to understand where we need to go on a go forward basis. But it's encouraging to hear from your perspective because you're in the mix that we're pretty engaged on what we have to do.
And we're doing different, we're handing out one door key at a time. We're right now working with some folks who might have some mental health issues. That's obviously been a crisis in America. We're looking to build some additional accessory dwelling units, and we're working with charitable organizations like the Community Foundation of Monterey County
Right.
to expedite more density or a few more units in our existing portfolio that are under construction right now in Salinas.
Well, and let's kind of finish up with that and allow you an opportunity to what's Chispa up to,
Yes.
and what I like, kind of looking back over, the portfolio of Chispa's work over the
Yes.
last decade. In a good sense of the word, you really hit kind of niches or specialized needs
Yes.
particularly well when it comes to housing, and that
Right.
and that kind of loops back around to the whole Fair Housing Month, creating access for because folks who need housing, besides income levels, have a variety of different needs or challenges or at different stations in life.
Well, we're excited about a lot of different things that we're moving forward on. So we have about 40 units of affordable housing that will begin construction in June. That's in South County. We are working to build 35 units of senior housing in Salinas. So that's still right now. We're just putting together the financing to make that work. Overall, I'd say we have several hundred units that we're working on across the Central Coast. And, we have some big projects like in Gonzales. We also have some of these accessory dwelling units are under construction now here in Salinas. We have and we can't forget preservation. We're working on a $9 million preservation at Vista de la Terraza by Carr Lake,
Right.
and
Right.
I can't wait to do a ribbon cutting for that. That's going to be
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, how's that going? Because I remember that
Oh,
project from the first time I was the mayor. And well, it needed some rehabilitation, as I recall.
it's one of our earliest projects, and it served a great purpose, and it frankly had a lot of issues with the decks. It's on a slope.
Right.
It a lot of these decks were not. It's like a lot of these things; they get dangerous after a while.
Right.
They're all torn off. We found some pretty crazy conditions underneath some of these decks that we were able to correct. You see a gas line that's in the wrong place, and you
Right. Right.
move it where it's
Minor
supposed to go.
details.
Little things like that are kind of important.
Yeah. Kind of.
And frankly, making better connectivity, we're making public spaces that connect right to some of the soccer fields and these beautiful improvements that are coming in place at Carr Lake. There's just better connectivity with the whole community, and we have services that we're connecting to. One of the things I love about Salinas and about this area is frankly the generosity and the fact that it's a resourceful, family oriented, it's a smart place to be. It's very innovative. People wear a lot of hats, and generally, I think folks are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. I certainly would
Yeah.
agree with that, and I think that's a great note to end on. Unless one of my favorite questions is when I get a chance to visit with folks, did we miss anything?
I think we covered it well. I think that I'm optimistic about Salinas. I'm optimistic about the collaborations. I think the main thing I want that my hope for Salinas is that all different parties with different points of view that we come together in constructive dialogue to better help our residents and to create more affordable housing. And I think with the right kind of solid leadership with everyone coming together and listening to each other, we're going to come up with solutions we've never thought of.
That's a great note to end on, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, and terrific to visit with you. And I'm sure our paths will continue to cross.
Thank you for inviting me, Mayor. I
It was my
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.